The message is clear. Our culture and the media tell us to look out for number one, and in a way, they're right. Running the race of life involves understanding who is in charge. Once we realize that number one is not us, the race gets a lot easier. Today, let's take the first step in living life with God in firm control. Stay with us. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Today, Erwin Lutzer begins a new series that tells what happens when God is first. Turn with us to the book of Acts, where we'll first learn that He owns our hearts.
So, what would happen if God were first? What would happen if God were first in our lives and in our church? Well, first of all, obviously, we think differently. Worship would not be something that we do only on Sunday. We wouldn't take a card out of the drawer on Sunday morning and said, "Oh, worship time." God would be the center of our thinking, and we would be intoxicated with a love for God. So we'd think differently. We'd certainly love differently. Imagine loving the Lord our God with all our hearts, with all our mind, with all our soul, and our neighbor as ourselves. In other words, could you even imagine what it would be like if we were more concerned about someone else's need than our own, and esteem others better than ourselves? Well, we'd certainly act differently. Our bodies would belong to God. Our eyes, our ears, our tongues, our appetites would belong to God. Our relationships would belong to God. Everything would belong to God. The transfer of ownership would be complete. Sins that have been rationalized for a long time would finally be confessed and forsaken, and people would receive help and say, "I am done with low living. I'm done with failure. I'm going to go for broke." Our hearts would belong to God, and we as a church would become a church, to coin a phrase from someone else, of irresistible influence. The impact would be enormous in this city and around the world. Now, if you think that this is something we can do, we can just all sing, "Okay, here we are, God, we're giving you everything." If you think that that's something we can do on our own, you're mistaken. Oh yeah, words are cheap. We can sing the songs and we can say the prayers, but to actually make that transfer of ownership is incredibly difficult and hard, and it's going to be battles. For example, just imagine for a moment of saying to God, "God, from now on I give you all of my television viewing habits, and I will no longer look upon anything in a movie or a television set that is unholy." Could you imagine that? Demons who've been kind of sleepily wandering about in the atmosphere would suddenly be aroused. They would be in your living room, giving you the fight of your life, if you were to say that. All the forces of hell would be aroused and say, "No way." Think, for example, of what it would mean if you say, "I surrender all of my relationships to you, and those relationships that are leading me into sin, no matter the cost, I sever those relationships in the power of the Lord." Or, here's one. "God, from now on I take all of my money, which I've always thought was mine, to do as I wished, and what I want to do is to now recognize this is your money over which you have made me a steward. So I have only one question. What will you have me to do with what you have given me and what is yours?" Could you imagine that? This ferocious beast called covetousness would arise in our hearts and say, "Absolutely not. I am worthy of all of the perks. I can't think of anyone more worthy than I to own what I have." What about if we gave our reputations to God and said, God, we're tired of image building and always just playing to the camera. We're tired of building our reputations on what other people think. What other people think oftentimes is important, but that's not what we are going to be doing. We are going to just simply say, God, here it is, I'm yours. Could you imagine? I mean, we hang on to all these things until our knuckles turn white. So if you think that we can do this on our own and just stand up and sing the right song and make the right commitment, you're mistaken. We can't do it. Our commitment will be like the dew that falls on the grass, and when the sun comes up, lo and behold, there's no dew there. It's gone. We're talking about a radical commitment, folks. So radical that we can't do it on our own, and that's why we are going to turn to the book of Acts. Acts chapter 1, and my text today is verse 8. I wish I had time to paint the context, but I think you know it. Jesus is on his way to heaven, and he's passing on the baton. And so he says, if you're going to do my work, which we are called to do, you'll notice Acts 1, verse 1 says, in the former book, Theophilus, I wrote about things that Jesus began both to do and to teach. He started it, and now you have to finish it. So here's the baton. But you can't do it without my power. A.J. Gordon was walking across a field one day, and he saw a man pumping water tirelessly, effortlessly, and continuously. And he thought, where's this guy getting his energy from? As he got closer, he realized it wasn't a man at all. It was only the figure of a man cut out of plywood. The man was not doing any pumping. He was being pumped by an artesian well. Wouldn't that be wonderful if you had an artesian well within you springing up to enable us to make the commitments we should, but we're scared to death to make? Acts 1:5, very quickly, God's promise, first of all. Secondly, our responsibility. And thirdly, how do we receive the power? That's the agenda. If you came here to church for some other reason,